Welcome to the first part in a new series of videos on the separation of church and state called The Real Wall. This series will cover 6 topics, including the history of separation, from the Pilgrims to the Founders, the words of the Founders themselves, the allegation of our government having been founded upon Christian principles, separation in prayer in public schools, separation in local state governments, and finally the issue of tax breaks for religious institutions. In my discussions with people on and off of YouTube, it has become frighteningly clear that there is little understanding among Christians of the importance or purpose of the separation of church and state. The website noseparation.org even goes so far as to claim that the entire concept is a myth. But as this video will prove, separation of church and state is very much a part of our government, and it was central to the political views of our founders even before they had won their independence. To fully grasp this, it's best to start at the very beginning, when the first pilgrims arrived on the eastern shores of the New World. When King Charles I came to power in 1625, it spelled trouble for a religious group known as the Puritans. Feeling that the Protestant Reformation had not gone far enough in England, the Puritans had rejected the use of ceremonial vestments, the Book of Common Prayer, and virtually anything in the Anglican Church that still had the appearance of Catholicism. Charles I not only married a devout Catholic, but he took William Laud as his personal advisor, who later became the Archbishop of Canterbury. Together, the three of them sought to purify the Church of England by expelling dissidents like the Puritans and closing many of their organizations. Laud used the British courts to issue convictions without due process and enforce torture to elicit confessions. The final straw came when Charles dissolved Parliament in 1629, which was largely under Puritan control. This began the Great Migration, when an estimated 20,000 Puritans relocated to the Massachusetts Bay Colony between 1630 and 1640. Although they came to America seeking religious freedom, the Puritans were not very tolerant of any views dissenting from their own. During the Salem witch trials, many innocent women and men were executed for either espousing views that were atypical to the Puritan community or for simply getting on the bad side of a neighbor. Back in England, persecution of the Puritans would continue under Charles II. Taking inspiration from such hostile attitudes, a British philosopher named John Locke wrote A Letter Concerning Toleration in 1689. One of the first political writings to advocate the toleration of various denominations and introduce the concept of separation of church and state. In his letter, Locke notes, "This is the unhappy agreement that we see between the church and state. If each of them would contain itself within its own bounds, the one attending to the worldly welfare of the commonwealth, the other to the salvation of souls, it is impossible that any discord should ever have happened between them." Locke's intent behind the separation of church and state was simple but powerful. Keep government out of religious affairs and keep religion out of government affairs. No church-state and no state-church. By doing this, everyone could be free to believe and worship as they please, without the fear of government or other religious institutions infringing upon that freedom. John Locke's political theories were tremendously influential to Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and many other founding fathers. The idea of every human being having natural rights endowed to us by our Creator is owed to Locke too, but it can hardly be said that he believed in the Christian God, as he opposed faith divorced from rationality and rejected the Trinity. In addition to Locke, the founding fathers also drew inspiration from Charles Montesquieu and Francis Bacon. Montesquieu was an 18th century French philosopher who wrote extensively on the separation of powers in government, and his religious views were even more nebulous than Locke's. However, he made his opinions on the roles of church and state quite clear in his work, The Spirit of Laws. The laws of perfection drawn from religion have more in view the goodness of the person that observes them than of the society in which they are observed. The civil laws, on the contrary, have more in view the moral goodness of men in general than of the individuals. Thus, venerable as those ideas are which immediately spring from religion, they ought not always to serve as a first principle to the civil laws. Francis Bacon was an English philosopher who advocated the separation of church and state and also played a significant role in popularizing the scientific method. In his novel, The New Atlantis, Bacon presented a fictitious utopian island that embraced abolitionism, women's rights, scientific analysis, freedom of religion, and the separation of church and state. Bacon's personal beliefs were also not 100% clear, but he frequently drew a distinction between the ethical duty to a community and the religious duty to God. In their decision to separate church and state, the Founding Fathers had in mind the history of religious persecution, the bloody witch trials of Salem, the tyranny of the English monarchy and its statute of the divine right of kings, and the political ideas of several philosophers who all supported the separation of church and state. The next part in this series will show just how influential these factors were to the founders, through the discussions they had and the language they chose for both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Thanks for watching, and please rate and/or comment if you enjoyed this video.